Hello, welcome back to another Institute Weekly Review. This week we have NASA Nazis transformed Alabama town into America's rocket city. Pentagon partners with Japan to save on hypersonic defense. And then we'll wrap up with NASA's mini moon rovers go for a test drive ahead of 2025 private lunar launch. So we'll jump into our first article here. I'll pass it off to you.
All right. Thank you, Mason. So, Rocket City. If you're not familiar with what this is Huntsville, Alabama. It's basically a little gem in the middle of nowhere. Like, in fact, if you're going through Alabama, you'll basically be going through, woodlands and just random stuff in the sticks. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this shot right here is what you'll see. Just a big rocket. Anyway, the story here is basically after we defeated Nazi Germany, there were a bunch of experts like Werner von Braun and all those people that we brought over as a part of Operation Paperclip. If you're not familiar, that was basically just almost a tech transfer program where we were transplanting people from Germany. The reason why we got these particular guys is because they were experts in rocketry. And what they did is they brought them to the Redstone Arsenal, which already existed in Alabama, and they took a town that was about 10,000 people of just farmers and the arsenal, by the way, and transformed it into what is basically the missile capital of the world, or the United States. And they were primarily housed in Marshall Space Flight Center during like the 1960s space race. And this article is kind of talking about how they interacted with the community and perhaps maybe is trying to throw some shade on Huntsville, Alabama's past. All right, Mason. So, with all that, what I got to open with is did did the Nazis themselves really seem to be the bad guys in this article, or were
That
what are your takes?
Yeah, that was what was kind of surprising to me, and I realize that it might just come along with the fact that this is a very nuanced ethical issue of the punishment that these men deserve for their complacency in the events of World War II. But it definitely seemed like this article was trying to personify the Nazis coming quite heavily, saying things like, specifically speaking of von Braun, who's the most famous Nazi scientist to come over, how he wouldn't let the other Nazi scientists speak German. He really wanted to, integrate with the American society in a much more active stance than just we kind of we're stolen from our home country and here we work. It seemed to be an actual effort to integrate. Of course, how much of that comes with relinquishing beliefs, I don't know. But this article definitely went very soft on the Nazis. I would say is that a vibe that you picked up?
I would go even as far as it makes it seem like the people like von Braun is actually a good guy, because I think there was a point where his name was like Silverstein, so he's Jewish, like obviously, and he said how he wanted to work with those guys because of their common interest. And then there was another guy who said that like even though they knew they were Germans, they were like in awe of them
Hmm.
because of like what they were able to produce. So like it almost makes it seem like these particular guys are good guys,
Yeah.
even though they were associated with the Nazis. And then another thing I would pose to you, did the Nazis really transform this place? Or was it the federal government itself? I mean, it already had the arsenal and they just transplanted a couple guys here. It's not like the Nazis did it, it's kind of like the government did it.
Oh, absolutely. The engine behind it was the U.S. government trying to push forward its own technological advancement. One question I have for you, I guess, that kind of answers that question one way or another of the Nazis, the driving factor. Um, for a brief period, you actually lived in Huntsville. Did you see, or do you see any German heritage? Anything that made you even think about Germans during your time living there?
Not really, but I do know a couple guys that said there are some really famous like food spots in there that I never went to
Uh huh.
that only exist because of the Nazis. So they're like German related.
That's That's
Yeah,
definitely a funny takeaway that the only impact you saw from the Nazis on Huntsville was the cuisine,
yeah.
which maybe does go to show at least some
How well
level.
they integrated.
Yeah, exactly. If it definitely didn't seem like they were trying to Nazify Huntsville. They were trying to become Huntsvillians after being Nazis.
Yeah.
So
And if we have more time at the end, I'd like to talk about inroads to the HB1 program. If you know what I'm talking about there.
yeah, absolutely. But with that, I will ask you to move on to what we have up next here. Would you like me to play
Okay,
this
okay.
video?
Give me a second.
Sounds
So,
good.
if you guys are not really familiar with what's going on here, there's kind of a big challenge that the United States is facing in terms of missile technology. And because of that, there's this new program called the Glide Phase Interceptor Program, which the United States is partnering up with Japan to produce. Raytheon's the prime contractor on this, and we're going to take a look at the threat that it's trying to hit. All right, take it away.
At velocities greater than Mach 5,
So this is a
hypersonic
hypersonic
glide
glide
vehicles
vehicle.
fly at lower altitudes and are more maneuverable than ballistic missiles,
And what's
allowing
distinct
them
about
to
the
maneuver
hypersonic glide
after launch
vehicle
in a
is the
way that
trajectory that it can
evades
fly
radar
on.
tracking and
So you see there, it's kind of
The DoD,
maneuvering.
U.S.
A typical missile that we would be trying to shoot down is ballistic. So it follows kind of the trajectory you see on that parabolic little dotted line there. What's a particular issue? Oh no, no,
Oh,
it's all good. It's at like 43. Go to like 43 or something. Maybe like a minute or something. But anyway, the hype. So there are new classes of missiles that have been fielded by China and Russia, and they're called hypersonics. And a particular class, like we said, is this hypersonic glide vehicle, which poses a huge challenge. This is because existing radars typically expect it to have a trajectory that you can estimate from physics one equations. And what's really interesting about this is it's showing kind of a challenge that the missile defense industry always faces, which is if someone innovates offensively, then you have all of these really exquisite, grand systems that need to change. And you know what I mean? Like these are really big systems that require a lot of different components. You can see all these different little, you can see a radar, an aircraft carrier, and then the interceptor, which would have to come out. So that's a big challenge. But this article is, I wanted to give this as a background, but this article is mostly focusing kind of on the cost savings aspect, and it's trying to really hammer that the MDA might be late on this project, even though it's talking about how they have cost savings.
hmm.
So I think that's really interesting because the headline is basically, oh, look, we saved money, but then the internal is basically, oh, it's not going to meet its timeline. But I think that's interesting because it seems like what I've seen so far, pretty much every defense contract uh, pretty much goes late from what I've seen in the news.
It certainly would be interesting to see how many of them actually show up early, because I pick up the exact same feeling, but it can't really
Yeah.
be that way. I hope, but uh, one thing, looking at this, the flight path of um, this projectile, it strikes me as it looks more like a drone flight path than a quote unquote missile flight path. Is
And
that
that's what makes them so dangerous. It's they have little fins and stuff so that they can kind of they're going at hypersonic speeds, mind you, and they're gliding, and then they kind of just maneuver to because what's happening here is the radars it's looking not in that area, but also it doesn't want to shine right on the water because it's going to get reflections and stuff like that. So
mm,
if it goes close to the water, then it's really really hard to detect for like a normal stuff like this. So they have to basically make this new program, which is Glide Phase Interceptor, which has some additional stuff, some overhead tracking in order to help them.
okay?
Yeah.
And when was this project supposed to be done? If it's
In 2029.
2029, and with them
Yeah.
saying they're not going to meet schedule, have they proposed any other deadline or any other?
Well, it just seems more like it's going to be early 2030s or even beyond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh. No, I've read stories of low flying missiles taking out Russian ships in the Ukrainian Russian conflict, and it seems like a simple problem to someone with no experience. It's a missile, shoot it down the same way you shoot any other missile down, but the the flight path it takes, just seeing this image right here, I can definitely see how that poses a huge challenge for the defense of it.
And with that, we'll move on to our next little bit.
Yeah, so I want to.
Oh, we broke the fourth wall.
Oh no!
It's over.
All right, so recently this week, NASA has been testing its next series of rovers that are going to be traveling to the moon. This is kind of a bit of a follow-up to the recent moon landing that we celebrated very, very shortly after it occurred from the Intuitive Machines lander, because in that episode we discussed, what's in this for NASA? How does, this is a private moon lander, but how does NASA gain value from it? Well, this is one of the ways that they are going to do this. This is going to be a module on the Innovative Machines third lander going to the moon, targeting later this year. And one thing you'll definitely notice is these landers are a lot smaller than the landers you would traditionally expect to see. That is not necessarily a true comparison, because these are still miniature landers for testing. They're testing autonomous capabilities and communication between these three landers, so they can kind of have a fleet or a swarm on the moon instead of just one lander driving around. So it's not entirely clear how big these landers are going to be, as these are the miniatures, but it does seem like they are progressing through their testing quite well and on track to, at least as far as they say, to take their place on the moon potentially later this year or early 2025. So I think it's...
What are they supposed to? What are they supposed to carry? Like, are they supposed to carry different payloads than normal? Is that part of why they want like a distributed setup here, or
They want it to be highly maneuverable and a little bit more robust, is what this article kind of phrases it as. So they want the ability to have a little bit of redundancy, having smaller rovers. If one of them has a wheel issue or something goes wrong, they still have a lot of their capabilities to continue traveling. I think honestly it's a more of a test for long range autonomous functionality, because these rovers on the moon are going to be essentially completely autonomous in their navigation and their path selection, and just communicating with each other to access the sensors that the other rovers have. So it's not entirely clear to me what they are specifically, or what sensors, what data specifically they're hoping to target, but they are hoping to spend at least 14 days on the moon doing some long distance traveling and trying to optimize their distance, is what it currently looks like.
so? Yeah, that's gonna impact space. But is there any like thing that you think could impact kind of us close to home? Like, do you think that there's something that's coming from this, or something that's maybe mentioned in the article relating to that?
Close to home, at least.
Like in terms of what the technology could be like put towards, like this idea of these little swarms of independent actors.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much pulling things down from this program to us currently, but you can definitely see parallels to like the drone fleet technologies that require a lot of computational power close by to communicate, done long distance. These rovers still are very, very early on in their development, so right now they mostly just look like motorized chassis with the ability to talk to each other. It is a development of the private partnership of NASA with Innovative Machines, and you continuously see that spoken about in any article that touches them. They always are saying this is a big deal because this is a private landing mission, and this is contracted space that NASA's getting, which always seems a little bit overblown to me. But
With that, I want to come back to this in a second, but I want to go back to the article, our shared article. Okay, this is basically kind of uh, similar to what happens with the HP-1 program. Are you familiar with that program? Just want to make sure.
I am not familiar with that program.
Okay, so a lot of like your professors and scientists and whatnot from foreign countries are brought over on HP-1 visas. So it's basically, obviously, I don't know the details. I'm not a super expert, but essentially, uh, it's a it's a program that brings over experts from other countries to our country to allow them to work in our country, and it helps provide a path to work here and then maybe later become a citizen. Some people don't like these programs because they feel like it outcompetes Americans for high skilled jobs. But in something like this, like there are no Americans that can do what these guys are doing. So we needed to pull them over. So what do you take away from this and maybe some arguments that people make regarding that high skill issue?
Yeah, it seems like it with governments or institutional bodies. It always seems to be an ends justify the means situation, and I think that that's kind of what we're looking at here. In addition to the more modern problem, people not liking their jobs being taken by high skill immigrants. From the perspective of the entire body, the U.S. government, these are assets that are arguably needed. That we can kind of just import and transplant into our own industry. So
I also think it indicates something interesting too. It's like it is saying like, okay, it is so challenging for someone to develop a technology, and then once they have it, like it's hard for the government to basically have domestically grown people that are interested in that at the time where they most need it.
mm-hmm.
So like I almost take this is an argument for why we almost need the HB1 program, because it's like you can never really predict like to adequately train your workforce until like that critical problem happens. So you almost need to.
Import the seed that you
Yeah.
can then grow yourself into whatever it is you're hoping to achieve.
And it also like demonstrates how important it is like to develop technologies yourself. I mean, like if you let other people develop it, then you're at the mercy of having to import them. But if someone else can outcompete you, like let's say China, then you're screwed.
Yeah,
You know.
I think it
So
it
having
also.
adequately trained Americans is like kind of a need,
Hmm,
but we also need this.
yeah, no, definitely, and I mean the effects that the Nazis had coming over here on Huntsville, as far as I mean, we're looking at a photo of a rocket here. I don't think we would be without them. So their effect is inarguable. I definitely think what's interesting, especially at this time, right after World War II, when America is trying to maybe propagandize its exceptionalism and export it across the globe, saying, our we have true morals. We are, positioning themselves as the global good guys, the defender of honorable and worthwhile values. But then we will completely subvert those values when it benefits us by allowing justice to somewhat go unclaimed, and these Nazis to get to finish their lives with really no repercussions for the incredible amount of harm they caused in World War II. Any thoughts on that
Uh,
concerning the
I like it. I personally like it because I'm biased, and I think more power to the nerds. So that's an example of the nerds basically developed something that made them so powerful that a whole country was willing to subvert its own propaganda. Uh, so my takeaway is basically the government has to operate um, outward facing, like in a nice way, but internally it operates in terms of hard power. Like, do I have oil? Do I have this? Do I have whatever? So I think This is just more argument for why we need more makers.
If we have these people on home soil, we don't need to import war criminals.
Yep.
And on that thought, I think we will wrap up this week's episode. Thank you for joining us. If you have any comments, questions, or thoughts, please leave them in the comments, and we will see you next week.